Yeah, hi. Good evening, everyone. Right. So today we are going to start out with our examination of the arbitration ecosystem in terms of the applicable law, which is represented by the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996. Now, effectively, we'll be devoting three sessions to taking a look at what exactly arbitration entails and what are its similarities and dissimilarities in relation to whatever we have spoken about in terms of the litigation process so far during the course. So, today I only intend to give you a very brief overview or a very brief sort of introduction to what exactly arbitration represents as a process and what exactly does it entail in terms of the prospective litigant who, let's say, is interested in having disputes adjudicated through the arbitration process. Now, in the next two sessions, which is day after and on Sunday, we will deal with the more specific provisions under the Arbitration Act and the major substantive as also procedural issues which have arisen in the last few years and the contemporaneous, let's say, disputes or debates surrounding some of the more recent developments surrounding the Arbitration Act. But today, it's only intended as a very basic primer in terms of what arbitration represents. Now, for all of you, I have shared this one article which provides a very good review in terms of the arbitration process in the country. It is sort of meant to be an introduction to persons who are new to the arbitration field and would like to get an understanding of how exactly the arbitration law in India is represented in terms of real practice. So I would suggest that all of you go through that piece. It's a very well written and articulated piece in terms of the basics of what exactly constitutes arbitration in the country today. Now, having said that, see, the very first issue or the very first element which you must take into consideration when you talk about arbitration in India vis-a-vis litigation is that there are, in fact, you will be surprised to find that there are more similarities rather than dissimilarities in the entire process and the way in which arbitration proceedings are conducted. We will come to those. But at the very outset, what is the most important differential between arbitration and litigation as we know it? This difference is only this, and which is, see, when we talked about the entirety of the litigation process so far, and we went into a lot of the arenas which are otherwise not covered in the standard literature or the standard exposition around litigation, we saw that one of the biggest challenges which a lawyer will face is determining the forum before which to articulate the potential case of the client which is being brought forth before him or her. Now, in arbitration, there is a further step in terms of actually reaching that forum. This is that you must constitute the forum in the first place. Now, see, in every single, let's say, forum which we contemplated when we talked about litigation, be it a writ court, be it the NCLT, be it a civil court, whatever forum possible in terms of a court or a statutory tribunal, all of these forums were pre-existing. They were very much part of a existing physical infrastructure. There were existing judges in the form of manpower who were actually manning these courts or tribunals. And access to these tribunals was only a matter of demonstrating either subject matter or pecuniary or territorial jurisdiction. In the case of arbitration, things are very, very different. And this is for the reason that under the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, the forum concerned is created by the parties to the dispute. Now, how does this work? So, in arbitrations, for instance, in a lot of the other court systems, as we spoke about exclusive jurisdiction clauses, when we spoke about the initial phase of how to determine a litigation or how to determine the correct forum which to approach in the case of litigation. Remember, I told you about exclusive jurisdiction clauses, wherein they are more in the nature of opt out provisions, whereby, let's say, if both Delhi and Calcutta have jurisdiction, you could always have said, no, we will not go to Calcutta. We agree between ourselves that with both Calcutta and Delhi having jurisdiction, I will only go to Delhi. Effectively, that meant that you were opting out of a particular court and only proceeding to go to one particular court. A much stronger version of an opt-in provision is what is represented by an arbitration clause or by an arbitration agreement. So effectively, arbitration is something which is purely based on consent between the parties. Now, let's take that case of A and B again. Now, B acted in a way which were prejudicial to A's interests. So A didn't have to take B's consent to sue B in a civil court. There is no question of consent there. If there is a cause of action in your favor, you go ahead and you articulate that particular cause of action in the form of a litigation. But in the case of arbitration, please remember, there necessarily has to be an agreement between the parties, say for instance A and B, that they will be referring their disputes for adjudication by arbitration. So at the outset, there is this element of consent, which is a sine qua non for a matter to proceed to arbitration, and which is not the case in the majority of the litigation processes in the country, almost actually in the entirety of the litigation processes in the country. So tied in with its very definition as being a form of alternative dispute resolution, which by its very name does indicate the fact that it is not something which is part of the normal dispute resolution mechanism, or what one might call the dispute resolution mechanism, which is deriving its strength from some sort of a sovereign dicta or some form of a sovereign articulation of what jurisdiction means. Arbitration is purely centered around consent between the parties. So as someone had asked in one of the previous classes, that is it not better to probably go for arbitration if one does not want to deal with, say, the strict timeline, say, of a civil suit in a commercial context? Yes, absolutely. This customizability is really at the heart of arbitration. Now, this is something which is referred to as party autonomy. And this really underlines the very essence of arbitration. And this is meant for in the sense that when you talk about arbitration, you are pretty much able to customize everything. Now, for instance, if you were to purchase a PC from, say, a standard OEM, then there would be a limitation to the extent of customization that one might be able to, let's say, proceed with or do. But if you're getting your PC assembled, for instance, then it is completely your brainchild. You decide in whatever manner you would want that process to go forward and what are the components that would form part of the same. Now, to take a very rough sort of equalization, arbitration to a large extent offers you that same kind of customizability. So always remember, arbitration is purely based on consent, and the underlying rationale for providing that consent or for providing that leeway to the parties is that there should be that freedom available for the parties to be able to choose the mode and mechanism in which to have their dispute settled. Now, see, by its very nature, this is something which is a bit jarring when you talk about the court system as a whole. Because what is the court system all about? The court system is all about ensuring that there is an independent and neutral forum for adjudication of disputes between the parties, which obviously will not have any affiliation to any of the parties who are actually, let's say, part of that controversy or actually have a stake in the subject matter of the controversy. So inevitably a question will come at the very threshold, at a theoretical level, that isn't arbitration to that extent sort of like a go by to the general notion that the adjudicatory mechanism or the adjudicatory forum cannot be dictated by the interests or by the requirements of a party to a dispute. Now, obviously, there is that underlying recurrent tension between the customizability or the autonomy that arbitration offers and the overarching need to ensure some level of fairness and impartiality in the entire process. Therefore, the balancing of this need to still ensure an overarching level of fairness, impartiality, and independence, not only of the individuals who constitute the arbitral tribunal, but also of the process as a whole, you have some fundamental normative parameters as laid down by the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, within which the arbitration agreement or the autonomy offered by the arbitration agreement must function. So please bear this in mind, because one of the misconceptions around arbitration is that under the arbitration clause between the parties can choose pretty much everything. That is obviously a simplistic, in a simplistic sense, yes, that is the kind of customizability that arbitration seeks to offer. But please remember, at least in India, the way the arbitration law has developed is that there are a lot of checks and balances which are put in place under the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996, both in terms of choice of arbitrators as also in terms of how the process of arbitration itself is actually to be conducted by the arbitrators. So there is a lot of controversy in relation to what is this balance that must be achieved, because proponents of stricter court intervention, of stricter court oversight over the arbitration process, argue in the favor of the stricter oversight, in the sense that they believe that the kind of deference which is offered to arbitration as a system is unwarranted, because it hasn't really evolved and developed to that extent in our country, wherein it can be said to be a fair or a completely perfect equivalent to a normal adjudication before the court system. The counter view is that the very, let's say, increase in the sort of prerequisites, or in sort of these, let's say, unavoidable, basic, fundamental features which might be put in place, say, by the Arbitration Act or by a judgment, will actually obliterate the entire purpose of going into arbitration, and which is to ensure that parties are able to agree to the mode and manner in which they want to have their disputes settled. So you will see this right from, let's say, the initiation of the arbitration ecosystem in the country, when we had, the very first manifestation of the Arbitration Act, which came in the early years of the 20th century. Then we had the 1940 Arbitration Act subsequently, which is like one of the first concrete articulations of the arbitration ecosystem. And subsequently, of course, we have the modern statute in the form of the 1996 Arbitration Act, which obviously again witnessed significant amendments in the year 2015 and 2019. So always remember, as counsel, and also from the perspective of advising the clients, there is a significant recurrent underlying tension between the notion of party autonomy and what the statute and the case law requires in terms of the control or oversight of the arbitration process. So neither positions are completely true. That there is absolutely zero customizability, that is not correct. There is a significant level of customizability, but at the same time, the notion that you can agree to everything under the sun, that is also incorrect. Now, this is very basic, but you will be surprised to see the number of parties which will come to you with an arbitration clause which they would have signed with the counterparty, and they would be insistent on the fact that the arbitration clause is actually operationable, or can actually be operated in the manner in which it is worded. But when you go to, say, a late recent judgment, or when you actually look at the statute, you will come to a finding that that clause is completely inoperable, because it is contrary to the settled law or otherwise. And on the other hand, you will actually find clauses which seem a little unfair, which seem one-sided. But unfortunately, the law as it stands today still requires you to actually submit to that arbitration clause, irrespective of what might seem to you to be a very unfair outcome. Now, the practical examples of this we will obviously come to in the next couple of sessions when we deal with the specific sections under the Act. But for today, at the outset, please bear in mind this element, that one important distinction between litigation and arbitration is the element of consent, mandatory consent being required to proceed to arbitration. There are some very few exceptions to this, which obviously have been articulated as the law has evolved, in the sense of certain third parties who are intrinsically connected to an overarching, let's say, transaction, which might have an arbitration clause, etc., being maybe forced to go into arbitration. But that is the exception and not the norm, and which we will come to when we come to the specific sections. That is point number one. Point number two, arbitration is extremely similar to litigation and much more similar to litigation than the other two processes that are usually contemplated within this overall family of alternate dispute resolution. Now, for those of you who've already undertaken internships and have seen arbitrations or have studied arbitration as a course, you will obviously have already gone through this. But for those who haven't, please remember, a misguiding or a misleading aspect of an understanding of arbitration often arises because it is clubbed together with mediation and conciliation. See, one way in which the arbitration may be somewhat similar to mediation and conciliation is that ultimately these are all voluntary processes. In the sense that unless it is some sort of mandatory mediation, for instance, under the Commercial Courts Act, as we were dealing with on the last class, all of these processes are usually brought about only by consent between the parties. But that is where the similarity ends. Because when you talk about mediation and conciliation, there are two stages of consent. The first stage of consent is when you agree for the process itself. That is, A and B will sit together and agree, all right, let's try mediation. A and B will sit together and agree, all right, let's try conciliation. Or let's say A and B will sit together and decide, let's try negotiation. Again, one offshoot of, let's say, mediation. So ultimately, this is the first level of consent, which is also applicable to arbitration. So A and B will agree, all right, let's try arbitration. But now what happens? Where is the second level? In the case of mediation, negotiation, conciliation, parties will try and work out their disputes. And at the end of the process, they once again have to consent to have that ultimate resolution being mandatorily applicable to them and for them to be bound by it. Now, what does this mean? For instance, A and B agreed to mediation under a particular gentleman. They undertake that mediation process, let's say for 2 months or 3 months. Now, at the end of this, the gentleman may try and, let's say, reach a via media, and he may tell A and B, look, this seems to be something which is a reasonable solution. What do you guys have to say? And at that stage, A and B may decide to agree and enter into a compromise and end their disputes. Or one of them may decide nothing doing. What is being offered by the counterparty is too ridiculous a proposition. There is absolutely no chance of a settlement. Therefore, I am backing out. So please see, the ultimate result of the process, even after the initial consent to actually undertake it, is again subjected to a second stage consent by the parties concerned. But in the case of arbitration, there is no second stage consent. The minute you agree for arbitration, then you are mandatorily bound by the process, both in terms of having to undertake it, as also being bound by the ultimate determination thereof as manifested in the arbitral award. So please understand, just like in the case of litigation, it is not open to you to agree or disagree with a verdict issued by a court. Of course, you have the right to may invoke challenge remedies. You may go in appeal, revision, whatever it is. But it's not up to you to decide, oh, should I accept this verdict or not? There is no such discretion available with you, because that verdict, rightly or wrongly, is binding on you. This is exactly the position in an arbitration as well. An arbitration, once begun, unless it is compromised or settled between the parties, will only culminate in the form of an arbitral award. If that arbitral award is rendered by the competent tribunal in the form of the sole arbitrator or a larger tribunal, you will be bound by that adjudication unless you are able to overcome it by filing the requisite challenge proceedings before the court. So please remember, it is binding. You will be surprised at the number of people who will come to you with arbitration clauses later saying, oh, I only signed on this because mujhe laga it is sort of like, a informal sort of dispute resolution. I thought there will be some mediation. I can always say, no, what's the big deal? So this is completely incorrect. Please bear in mind, with arbitration, you are not, there's no question of testing the waters. It is not a soft form of ADR in that sense. It is something which is very, very similar to litigation in terms of its ultimate result and its impact on your rights and obligations under the law. This is point number 2. Point number 3. Unlike in the case of mediation or conciliation or negotiation, arbitration is extremely adversarial in nature. One of the problems with arbitration in the last few years in the country has been that arbitration proceedings take a lot of time and they go on endlessly, and ultimately they happen to a large extent, say, between closed doors, because unlike in the court system where everything is open to everybody, arbitrations generally, because of the private nature of the dispute resolution, and now of course confidentiality is expressly enumerated by the 2019 amendment, they happen not so much in the public view. And therefore, there is a misconception among a lot of practitioners about arbitration, that arbitration is very similar, say, to mediation or negotiation, where the arbitrator will come and try and act as a via media between the parties. And that therefore, there is not much contestation on the merits in the form of an arbitration proceeding. But again, please bear in mind, arbitration is extremely adversarial in nature. Because ultimately, the only way it is different from a court process once the actual adjudication on the merits begins is that it is more informal. So unlike in the case of a court or a tribunal where you may have to have exacting requirements in terms of procedure, etc., arbitral tribunals are more flexible, because the arbitral tribunal is one which is specific to your adjudication, and the arbitral tribunal is one which is only sitting to determine your disputes on that particular day whenever the matter is fixed for arguments before the tribunal. Therefore, you get a lot of leeway in terms of procedure. You may be able to ask, say, for longer timelines. You may make requests for, let's say, certain leeway in certain aspects of how to, say, lead evidence. What is the manner of, let's say, the manner of filing the affidavits? What is the process of admission denial? So these processes, to a large extent, provided they are fair, provided they comply with the elements of natural justice, are things which are customizable by a tribunal or by agreement between the parties. But the underlying aim, which is to actually articulate a case on the merits for your party and convince an adjudicator, here represented by the arbitral tribunal, that your case is correct on the merits, is very much the reality in arbitration proceedings as well. Now, the reason why I'm stressing on this so much is because increasingly, there is this notion that arbitration proceedings operate in a separate bubble altogether, completely unaffected, say, by what is required in terms of succeeding before, say, a litigation forum. This is extremely incorrect, because whatever we spoke about in terms of the drafting, in terms of cases which are heavily contested, the requirement for oral evidence, in terms of the arguments which are articulated before a tribunal, the kind of case law which you must refer to demonstrate your point of view, all of these are squarely mirrored in arbitration proceedings as well. So, which is why I constantly tell persons or young lawyers or interns who want to know what is to be done if they want to specialize in arbitration, my first response to them is, please don't be under the misconception that arbitration is this sort of utopian adjudication methodology which does not have any of the trappings of litigation, or to put it in another way, which does not suffer from any of the demerits or evils which plague the litigation system. Ultimately, because arbitration is adversarial in nature, there is a significant interplay, both in terms of processes as also in terms of the skill sets which you must have as a practitioner in order to succeed before an arbitration tribunal. So please do not be under the misconception that arbitration is either something so sophisticated that it has absolutely nothing to do with litigation as a whole, or that the process undertaken is not very adversarial. See, you might be drinking tea during the hearing. You might have snacks during the hearing in the middle of you addressing the tribunal, because that is part of how the system's evolved now. But just because you're sipping tea during the hearing, or once in a while you take a break and chat with the arbitrators, that does not take away the seriousness of the process in terms of what it entails for your client, and in terms of what it entails for you as a counsel, in terms of demonstrating the basic parameters of a meritorious case to the tribunal. That is one very important point you must bear in mind. The other important point which you must bear in mind: arbitral tribunals help, or let's say not help, are advisable for a litigant to opt for, in as much as they provide certain advantages. But at the same time, you must also be aware of the disadvantages in terms of, let's say, advising a client at a very initial stage if he or she must actually opt for arbitration. See, one advantage which arbitration offers, and which is a significant advantage, is speed. Before the 2015 amendment, there are cases of arbitrations which have gone on for, say, 7 years, 8 years, 10 years, horror stories, and then have suffered another 15, 20 years of delay in terms of challenge in courts. But especially after the 2015 Arbitration Amendment Act, there are stricter timelines in place for arbitration proceedings. Now, it's not perfect. Arbitration proceedings even today take, let's say, about 2.5, 3 years to complete, though ideally that should not be the case. But ultimately, unless you are lucky enough to be before a court where the caseload is very low, or before a adjudicatory forum or a tribunal where for some blind luck your case gets disposed of very, very early, the average time for disposal of a full-fledged civil litigation is still much lower in arbitration proceedings, at least at the first stage, the original stage, than it is before a concurrent civil court or tribunal. And the reasons are not far to seek, because ultimately, as I mentioned, in arbitration, you are promised a specialized tribunal which will adjudicate disputes specifically for your party on a particular given day. Now, what I mean by this is, let's say both of A and B agree to appoint, let's say, me as the arbitrator. Now, when I, as the arbitrator, let's say fix a date, I say that on the 20th of October at 11 a.m., we are going to have a hearing. Then on that date, I, as an arbitrator, am only concerned with that case for that particular session. I may have, let's say, a lot of other professional engagements. I might be a lawyer. I may be practicing simultaneously. I may be undertaking other arbitrations as an arbitrator. But on that date, I am giving my undivided attention to that particular matter. So in that sense, arbitration, obviously normatively, in terms of the process, is something which is definitely geared towards quicker resolution. Number two, arbitration also has become more efficacious now, in the sense that after the requisite amendments to the Arbitration Act in 15 and 19, which we will deal with in detail in the next two sessions, there is now a much greater value attached to an arbitral award in the sense of enforcement. Now, to just give you a brief example of what that essentially means, earlier, under the Unamended Arbitration Act 1996, after an award was passed, any challenge against that award in the form of a Section 34 petition would mean an automatic stay of the arbitration proceedings. Not the arbitration proceedings, an automatic stay of the enforceability of the arbitral award. What this meant is somebody could throw basically a complete waste of a pleading before a court, but statutorily he or she would get the benefit of stay against the arbitration award being enforced. But after the amendments to the Arbitration Act, there is now no longer an automatic stay of the arbitration award merely on the filing of a challenge proceeding. And what we spoke about in the reference to the CPC, in the case of a statutory appeal, now a Section 34 court also is empowered to ask the other side to make a pre-deposit, to be able to be given a chance to try and have the award stayed pending a determination of the merits of the controversy. So these obviously amendments have also helped in a way in which at least you will be able to see some fruits of the award pending the adjudication of the challenge there against by the aggrieved party. Thirdly, arbitration is also effective in certain more technically complex matters. See, as I mentioned to you, when you go to a civil court, there is no question of choosing a judge, right? There is a particular judge sitting there as per his or her roster, which is predetermined. You will then file your case there. But let's say you have a case involving a very, very complex technical problem. Let's say you have a construction dispute which pertains, or you have a construction contract, let's say for a nuclear power plant or even for a hydroelectric power plant. Now, obviously, there is going to be mind boggling complexity in that in the technical sense. Of course, commercial contracts of all kinds, whether technical or not, will have certain fundamental commercial logic as also the applicability of the Contract Act. That obviously any legally trained person can engage with. But in the case of, say, construction of a power plant, please just imagine the kind of technical aspects which will come about. Let's see the boiler, the turbine, the generator, the different specifications, the mechanisms of construction, the quality standards, specifications, etc. Now, naturally, imagine trying and going ahead before a civil court and trying to get this matter adjudicated. Naturally, there will be a lot of difficulty both in terms of the voluminous of the matter, as also the fact that one may not be able to choose a judge who is actually well versed with those technical parameters. Now, in the case of arbitration, if you opt for arbitration, naturally you will have the benefit of ensuring that you may be able to structure the arbitration panel in a way in which, let's say, at least you have one person on the panel, or the person who actually advocates as a sole arbitrator is somebody who has technical expertise in that particular area of disputes. Let's say some engineer who's dealt with power plants in the past, some design expert who's designed power plants in the past, etc., etc. So therefore, that is again one of the big advantages in terms of customizability. Another important element can also be confidentiality. You may not want certain issues, certain disputes, because they may contain issues of confidentiality, etc., to be articulated and ventilated before a public forum like a court because of issues of leakage of confidential information, etc. Now, of course, there are ways to try and obviously overcome this in court also. There are lots of mechanisms where courts can do impose requirements of confidentiality, particularly in IPR disputes. But again, as I said, in arbitration, you have far greater flexibility. And by its very nature, it is a process conducted away from the public gaze. So primarily, there are many, a lot of the articles you will find, obviously advantages of arbitration, disadvantages of arbitration, etc. But these are the primary ones. But now, what are the disadvantages? One disadvantage, which again, something which your client must reckon with, is expense. See, one way you save expenditure in an arbitration is you are not required to give any court fees. So in an arbitration, unlike when I discussed with you the civil litigation process, one of the important things you must bear in mind is your client able to pay for the court fee which he or she is required to deposit on account of the kind of relief that he or she is claiming. In the case of arbitration, there is no court fee because obviously it's an alternative dispute resolution mechanism. It's not something which utilizes the infrastructure of the traditional court system or the tribunal system. But naturally, the arbitrators who will be appointed to actually undertake the process of adjudicating are not supposed to do it on a pro bono basis. Therefore, you are going to have to pay the fees of an arbitral tribunal. Now, depending on the kind of dispute involved, these fees can be very, very significant. Now, to give you an example, let's say there is no agreement between the parties as regards the fees to be payable to an arbitral tribunal. The arbitral tribunal can determine it. And depending on the size of your dispute, the fees can be really high. Now, to give you a ballpark figure, let's say there is a claim of, say, 500 crores in an arbitration. It is not unknown for arbitrators to charge, say, 5 lakh per sitting, or say 3.5, 4 lakhs per sitting. Now imagine if this matter goes on for say 30 or 40 or 50 hearings. Just look at the amount of expenditure you're going to incur in terms of arbitrator's fee. Now, there is another way of looking at it. If a 500 crore claim you would have filed before a civil court, then possibly you may have paid much more in terms of the court fee. But this understanding that arbitration is necessarily a cheaper form of dispute resolution, at least in terms of the kind of expenditure you have to incur in monetary terms, may not be exactly be correct. So there is this one misconception that arbitration is necessarily cheaper than going to court. That may be correct in terms of your time value, in the sense of the amount of time you invest, because arbitration in most cases might be something which you can pull out in terms of a resolution in a much faster way. But at least in terms of the investment in terms of money, there is a misconception that necessarily arbitration is a very cost effective mechanism. It might not be so. Secondly, please remember that whenever you decide to opt for an arbitration process, you are bound by it. Not just in terms of the eventual result in the form of an arbitral award, but also in the form that you are then completely proscribed from articulating an alternative litigation strategy. What I meant by this is, in terms of Section 8 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, read with Section 5, I'm sorry, I'm jumping to the provision, but this is more in terms of the underlying principle. Once you sign an arbitration clause, you cannot opt for other forms of dispute resolution, say by directly approaching a civil court. So another misconception about arbitration is that arbitration at the end of the day is an optional mechanism, which both parties are agreeing to in an arbitration clause. But if any of them have a change of heart, they can always decide not to go in for an arbitration and decide to approach a normal civil court. This is incorrect. Once you sign an arbitration agreement, as I mentioned to you, that first consent, once that is present, then there is no question of a subsequent consent being taken either at the stage when you are sought to be actually referred to arbitration once a dispute arises, because primarily arbitration agreements are contained in agreements between parties when things are hunky-dory, when the transaction is just being started out with. And later when things turn sour, that is when disputes actually arise and arbitration is actually invoked. So please remember, there is only one stage consent in arbitration proceedings. Therefore, once you sign an arbitration agreement, tomorrow you can't turn around and say, no, I want to go to a civil court. I don't want to do arbitration at all. Now, what are the practical consequences? Let's say your client has an arbitration agreement. Your client's based out of Delhi. He or she decides to have a contract with a party based out of Paris. Now, the party which is headquartered in Paris insists in the arbitration agreement that the seat of arbitration shall be, let's say, somewhere in France, and the French law will apply substantively to that dispute. Now, at that stage, because the terms of the contract are so lucrative, there is obviously the chance of earning so much profit that the party says, oh, perfect, this is brilliant. But when the dispute arises, you'll be surprised at the number of parties which then do not want to undertake arbitration. Now, in the example I gave you, why is it so? Because imagine, for a dispute, the Indian party now having to go to France, engage lawyers in France, pay arbitral fees, let's say in a foreign currency, which amounts to much more, and then undertake the entirety of the trial in form of the arbitration process in France. So that is obviously possibly, completely obliterating the potential for an Indian party to be able to arbitrate in terms of the logistical difficulties. But once you sign on the dotted lines in the form of the arbitration agreement, too bad. So please understand, and this is obviously to a certain extent an overlap of what we spoke about earlier in terms of the mandatory nature of the arbitration. Once you opt in, then you are locked in for all practical purposes. There are very few exceptions, as I mentioned, in the case of writ remedy, for instance. Writ remedies being constitutional remedies, there are certain case laws which say that if there are no serious factual disputes, etc., then you may be able to, let's say, invoke the writ remedy even in the presence of an arbitration clause. But those judgments also lay down a very narrow scope within which you will be able to invoke the writ remedy when admittedly you have the recourse to arbitration proceedings in terms of the clause agreed and or entered into between you and the counterparty. So please bear in mind the fact that this is one of the disadvantages, depending on your perception of what arbitration actually brings to the table in terms of its inviolable nature. Now, the other small whatever disadvantage or whatever you might call it in terms of arbitration is that in as much as it mirrors the adversarial process, there is also, to a large extent, depending on the kind of arbitral tribunal which you are faced with, a replication of the difficulties of an adversarial system. For instance, in certain arbitrations where there is a significant, let's say, factual contestation between the parties, matters are not so straightforward. You may have a tremendous amount of oral evidence being led. Now, this is obviously significantly criticized in many contexts that there should not be a mirroring of the litigation system in arbitration. But because of its adversarial nature, if there is a severe factual contestation, then this entire process which we dealt with in a civil suit, what all did we look at? We looked at how the issues are framed. We looked at how witnesses are examined, how pleadings are filed, interrogatories, discovery, finally how our oral arguments are addressed, dealing with the entirety of this complexity in terms of procedure. In a typical arbitration, it is very, very possible that you have to deal with all of these stages. Though, of course, that is not the norm. But in many, many cases, a significant number of cases, you will see this entire process being replicated. Now, there are many reasons for that. There is a lot of debate in terms of who is to blame. Is it the arbitrators who are to blame? Are it the lawyers who have to blame? Or is it the inherent drawback in the system in the sense of the distrust towards arbitration proceedings, which is sometimes exhibited by courts, which here challenge proceedings to arbitral awards? Basically, the jury is out on all of this. But as a practical point, please bear in mind that arbitration is not necessarily, in that sense, a process which marks a significant departure from what litigation anticipates or requires you to do in terms of the process itself. So, in terms of the advantages or disadvantages, I won't even want to call it as advantages or disadvantages. In terms of, let's say, the basic features of what arbitration contemplates, please bear in mind the fact that these are the elements which you should bear in mind if you ever have to either yourself take a call in terms of whether to agree for an arbitration proceeding or advise a client when a specific query is put to you in relation to a particular contract where an arbitration agreement is sought to be incorporated. Now, maybe this is a slightly biased perspective since I do a lot of arbitration work, but in my overall experience, at least in high stake disputes, in high value disputes, arbitration overall, I think, is a more effective way of adjudication. And this is obviously in terms of not only the process, but because of how problematic the alternative is. Now, because the docket explosion of cases, the massive pendency before most of our arbitral tribunals, before most of our civil courts and statutory tribunals, unfortunately, as you all know, that standard process of adjudication is subjected to a lot of problems, whether it be frequent adjournments, ineffective hearings, prolonged massive dates, massive in the sense really long dates, 5 months, 6 months, 7 months between hearings, etc. These are to a large extent, even though not completely and not perfectly, let's say, remedied in terms of the arbitration ecosystem. Now, therefore, these are therefore some of the elements which you should bear in mind whether you decide or not decide to get into arbitration. And the last point which I wanted to focus on today in terms of the fundamentals is, one of the arguments or one of the elements which is actually put forth by persons who are not that well versed with how the system works at the ground level is that once you achieve an arbitral award in your favor, then that's it. There is absolutely no potential for the other side to be able to wage war or lay siege to the arbitral award in terms of trying to overturn it. Now, this understanding flows from the fact that there is no real appellate mechanism under the Arbitration Act. the Arbitration Act does not provide for an appeal against arbitral awards. Please note, I use the word appeal. I use the word appeal because unlike under the CPC, where the appellate forum is fully entitled to relook the entire record and once again take an independent view after having examined the entirety of the merits of the controversy. Under the Arbitration Act, there is no such appellate mechanism which is available. All you have available before you is a very limited challenge procedure provided for under Section 34 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act. But before I deal with the specific section in the upcoming classes, please note, please bear in mind, you will be surprised at the level of scrutiny which arbitral awards are subjected to when challenge proceedings under Section 34 are heard. Despite the wording of Section 34, which proscribes almost every form of merit review possible against an arbitral award, judicial interpretation of the provision has actually expanded the scope of challenge significantly. And depending on the outlook of the judge concerned, depending on the level of trust or let's say distrust in this case, or the level of jurisdiction which a judge hearing a petition under Section 34 wants to implement or wants to take into account, you will find extremely varied interpretations of the extent of interference which is possible with an arbitral award by different courts as exhibited in different judgments. So, therefore, another misconception about arbitration is that once you get the arbitral award, then that's it, end of story. It is true that the scope is limited, but it is still a reasonably large scope for you to be able to articulate a challenge to the arbitral award. So, therefore, please bear in mind that there is absolutely no question of any sort of a proposition being articulated that an arbitral award for all practical purposes is binding. You will find 10 judgments possibly saying that, but the reality on the ground level is not that. Therefore, please bear that in mind. So, fundamentally, these are, let's say, the overall parameters of what the Arbitration Act actually contemplates. And over the next two sessions, we will deal with the individual sections. We will deal with them thematically. In the sense, first, we will look at how tribunals are appointed. We will then take a look at the process to be followed by arbitral tribunals. Finally, we will take a look at the process of delivering the award and the challenge procedure. And we will also conclude with a brief examination of the differences between the two basic, let's say, divisions in the Arbitration Act in the sense of Part 1 and Part 2, with Part 1 being applicable to domestic arbitrations or international commercial arbitrations seated within India, and Part 2 obviously applying to foreign awards, which in that sense don't have a connection in terms of India either being the seat or both parties being Indian by definition. So this is how we will proceed with this entire course in the next two sessions. Now, before we conclude for today, and if you have any questions, then please type them out. But before we conclude for today, I also had something to discuss in terms of the projects going forward. So I see there obviously in terms of the fact that not a lot of you might have a real-time internet connection available in terms of when we are undertaking classes. So a lot of you are not here. But if one of you could actually volunteer within, if you have like a group in terms of this particular course somewhere on a WhatsApp group or something, if one of you could actually be the person who would actually speak with me about this, what I suggest we do is that all of you can actually decide or let's say come to a conclusion in terms of the kind of projects which you would want to submit in this course. I don't intend to take any presentation, so it will entirely be graded in terms of the project which you will be submitting to me. I would want a project, say about 5,000 words. And we can, of course, work out the timeline based on a larger discussion. But ultimately, in terms of selecting your topics, what I would suggest is, as I think it's being done for a lot of other courses, maybe all of you can call it dibs in terms of what are the courses which you would want to, what are the subjects on which you might want to write on. And all of them obviously must relate to what we have spoken about in the last 15 for 13, 14 odd sessions. And maybe it's a good idea to wait for the next 2 days in terms of the next two classes in terms of what we will be dealing with in terms of arbitration also. But if you are very sure of something you want to write about in terms of what we've already talked about during the litigation part of the course, then please feel free. So maybe what all of you can do is on the NALSA forums, probably you can call it dibs in terms of what are the topics which you want to write on. And if I could request one of you to actually just get nominated within the group, and maybe you can reach out to me on my email, and then maybe I can converse directly with that person in terms of how to take it forward. Because I don't think there is any way of getting everybody on board at the very same time in terms of dealing with this particular aspect of discussion. So once somebody is nominated accordingly and you can reach out, then maybe we can probably also talk about the kind of submission timeline which we are looking at, and the other formalities in terms of submission of the proposed projects. So this is basically it from me. Now for the next two classes also, please bear in mind, I had sent you two articles which talk about the 2015 amendments and the 2019 amendments to the Arbitration Act. So for the next two classes, please read the Arbitration Act. It's not a very long act, short act. Please read the Arbitration Act as a whole. And also please take a look at the 2015 and 2019 amendments so that you are well versed with the concepts when I run you through them. So that is pretty much it from me for today. And if there are any questions, you can go ahead and please, one of you definitely do what I mentioned in terms of reaching out to me in terms of what is to be done in the future. Okay. Okay. All right. Great. Yeah. Perfect. Thanks a lot, Prashasti. So Prashasti has just created a WhatsApp group. I will try and get added to this, and then so maybe you can just spread the word. I'll obviously join this group, but maybe you can possibly just spread the word, add everyone concerned. Then I will join the group, and then we can probably take it forward from there. Great. So that is it from me for today. If there are any queries in this regard, yeah, great. Yeah, please do that, Prashasti. Please do that. And if all right. So Pushpesh is, yeah. Yeah, so there is a query from Pushpesh again, a very good query in the sense that what happens if the parties subsequently decide not to arbitrate? Perfectly acceptable. So as I mentioned to you, this is the entire point of consent. So if both parties, let's say after the dispute arises, or if one of them wants to articulate, let's say the dispute in the form of having it adjudicated through the arbitration mechanism, if both of you agree at that stage saying for whatever reason, either arbitration is too expensive or it doesn't work out, then both of you can actually enter into an agreement at that stage, novating or obliterating the arbitration agreement as it exists between you. So please remember, if both of you consent, you can at any stage of the proceedings leave arbitration. Either you can compromise, settle the matter on the disputes, or even you can adjust or agree on the very basic parameter that both of you will not go to arbitration, but instead will approach the civil court or the competent forum. That definitely is something which you can agree to. And again, as I said, arbitration is completely built upon consent. So at any stage, if both parties once again consent to bring about a new status quo, that is perfectly permissible under the Arbitration Act. So I hope that answers your query, Pushpesh. So this is one element of consent which is not gridlocked by the statute. The statute doesn't say that 2 years later down the line, if you have a change of heart, then you can't do it. There is no such prohibition. At any point, you can say you can opt to pull out, provided there is consent. It can't be unilateral. Great. So then I think what we will do is we will call it a day for today. Now, please, as I mentioned to you, please do what is necessary in terms of reading for the next 2 days, because we will be covering those sections in over 2 days, which is a lot to cover in terms of the subject matter. So probably a prior reading will be really beneficial in terms of understanding that. Right. Perfect. Thanks a lot. All right. Good night. Good evening, everyone.